On March 15, 2022, Marcus Edgewater signed his name in the visitor log at Carlsbad Caverns National Park at exactly 8:04 a.m. Neat block letters, structural engineer's handwriting. The kind of precision that builds bridges and calculates load-bearing walls. The signature above his belonged to a family from Ohio. The one below would remain empty until the next morning.
I'm Lukas, and this is Lost Files. We tell the stories that mainstream media ignores. The disappearances, the mysteries, the cases that deserve more attention. If you know a story that needs to be heard, drop it in the form linked below. And if this one stuck with you, subscribe and let me know your thoughts in the comments.
Marcus was 33, methodical, cautious, the kind of man who checked weather reports twice and packed backup batteries for his backup batteries. He'd driven down from Albuquerque the night before, stayed at a Comfort Inn, eaten dinner at a Denny's, reviewed his hiking route on laminated park maps. He carried a day pack with water, trail mix, a first aid kit, and a headlamp, standard gear for the self-guided loop that took most visitors 2 hours to complete. By 6 p.m. that evening, when the park rangers locked the gates, Marcus Edgewater had not returned to the surface. His rental car sat alone in the parking lot under a sky that had gone the color of old blood. Inside his room at the Comfort Inn, the television was still on. He'd left the Weather Channel running, volume low, a habit from his bachelor apartment in Albuquerque. The forecast called for clear skies and mild temperatures, perfect hiking weather. 750 feet below ground, something had gone wrong. The search began at first light. Cave rescue is a specialized discipline. Teams of volunteers who know how to navigate vertical drops and squeeze through passages barely wider than a human body. They worked in shifts, following every branch of the cave system, calling Marcus's name into darkness that swallowed sound like water absorbing stones. Carlsbad Caverns is not one cave but a network. More than 30 miles of mapped passages with new chambers discovered every year. The park's public trail covers 3 miles of well-lit, well-traveled limestone corridors. But beyond the tourist route, the cave system sprawls in directions that challenge both equipment and sanity. Passages that require rope work, chambers filled with formations so delicate that a careless step can destroy artwork nature spent millennia creating. And gaps, lots of gaps, that lead to places no one has ever been. The thing about caves, said Ranger Elena Vasquez, who coordinated the initial search, is that they're full of places where someone can just disappear. A wrong turn, a loose rock, a passage that looks stable until you put your weight on it. We've had people vanish for hours in areas we thought we knew completely. The search teams found Marcus's water bottle on day 3 sitting on a ledge in a passage 2 miles from the main trail. No sign of struggle, no blood, no indication he'd fallen or been injured. The bottle was half empty and carefully placed, not dropped, as if he'd stopped for a drink and decided to leave it behind. They found his trail map on day 7, folded neatly and tucked into a crevice near what the Park Service calls the Devil's Den, a section of cave marked as off-limits to visitors. The map was annotated in Marcus's handwriting, small, precise notes about rock formations and passage widths, the kind of observations a structural engineer might make. But also something else. A question mark drawn next to a blank area on the map with the words "airflow here" written in pencil. By day 11, the teams had searched every accessible passage within a 2-mile radius of where Marcus had entered the cave system. They'd used dogs, thermal imaging, and sound detection equipment sensitive enough to pick up a heartbeat through 20 feet of limestone. They'd found nothing. The official report, filed 3 weeks later, concluded that Marcus Edgewater had suffered an accidental fall into an unmapped vertical shaft. Such shafts were common in the Carlsbad system, sudden drops that could extend hundreds of feet into darkness. Even if a fall wasn't immediately fatal, the depth and inaccessibility would make rescue impossible. "We've done everything we can," the park superintendent told Marcus's sister Diane during a meeting at the park headquarters. "I'm sorry, but given the circumstances, we have to presume that your brother is deceased." Diane Edgewater was a high school principal from Phoenix, a woman accustomed to dealing with problems that had solutions. She did not accept the presumption. She hired her own search team, experienced cavers from Colorado who specialized in technical rescue. They spent 2 weeks in the Carlsbad system, exploring passages the Park Service teams hadn't reached. They found nothing. Marcus's disappearance made regional news for a week, then faded. Missing hikers were not uncommon in New Mexico's wilderness areas. The desert and the mountains claimed people regularly. Sometimes their bodies were found years later, sometimes never. The story became a statistic, one of approximately 1,600 people who go missing in national parks each year. But Diane didn't stop. She called the Park Service monthly. She monitored cave rescue forums online. She learned the names of every chamber and passage in the Carlsbad system, memorizing the topology of a place she'd never seen. She developed theories about airflow and water tables, about passages that might have been missed or miscategorized. The rangers were patient at first, then polite, then reluctant to take her calls. There was nothing more to be done. Her brother was gone. For 14 months, Marcus Edgewater existed only in missing persons databases and in his sister's relentless hope. The Park Service updated its safety protocols. New signs were posted warning visitors to stay on marked trails. Life continued. Then, on May 22, 2023, a geology survey team from the University of New Mexico was conducting routine mapping in an unexplored section of the cave system. They were using ground-penetrating radar to identify potential new chambers, part of an ongoing effort to document the full extent of the Carlsbad network. Dr. Sarah Chen was monitoring the equipment when she noticed an anomaly. There was an air pocket where there shouldn't have been one, she later told investigators. The radar was showing empty space behind what appeared to be a solid wall, not a crack or a fissure, an actual chamber. The wall was in a section of cave that had been sealed off by rockfall decades earlier. The geology team had permission to investigate structural features, so they began carefully clearing debris from what looked like a narrow gap between fallen stones. "We used hand tools," Sugar's doctor, Chen explained. "Hammers and chisels. We didn't want to destabilize anything. It took us most of the day to widen the opening enough for a person to squeeze through. The gap led to a crawl space about 3 feet high and 20 feet long. At the end of the crawl space was a chamber. Chen went in first, followed by 2 graduate students. They had headlamps, rope, and radio communication with their colleagues outside. Standard protocol for exploring unmapped areas. The chamber was bigger than we expected, Chen said. Maybe 12 feet wide, 15 feet long, dry. The ceiling was about 8 feet high. There were formations, stalactites, flowstone, beautiful formations that hadn't been touched by human presence. Then Chen's headlamp beam found the far wall. There were marks, she said, scratches in the limestone, organized scratches, groups of 5, like someone was counting days. The marks covered most of one wall. Vertical lines arranged in neat clusters, methodically spaced. Chen counted them quickly. More than 1,000. Then she panned her light across the rest of the chamber. Sitting cross-legged on the floor directly beneath the tally marks was a man. He was thin but not emaciated. His hair had grown long and he had a full beard. His clothes, cargo pants, hiking boots, a flannel shirt, were dirty but not destroyed. He was staring directly at the entrance where Chen and her students crouched. "At first I thought we'd found a body," Chen said. "He was so still. But then he blinked." The man looked at the 3 researchers for several seconds without speaking. Chen said his expression was calm, almost curious. Then he laughed. It wasn't the kind of laugh you'd expect from someone who'd been trapped, Chen told investigators. It wasn't relief or hysteria. It was low, flat, like he found something mildly amusing. And it went on for maybe 30 seconds, just this steady, quiet laughter. When the laughter stopped, the chamber was completely silent. Finally, the man spoke. "I thought it would be longer." Chen asked if he was injured, if he needed medical attention. The man, who would later identify himself as Marcus Edgewater, shook his head. He was polite, responsive, coherent. He answered basic questions about his name and date of birth, but when Chen asked how long he'd been in the chamber, Marcus looked at the tally marks on the wall and smiled. 47, he said. Chen counted the marks later. There were 1,400 of them. Marcus had been missing for 427 days. The rescue took 6 hours. Marcus walked out under his own power, assisted by park rangers and paramedics. He was dehydrated and underweight, but his vital signs were stable. His speech was clear, his movements coordinated. Apart from obvious effects of prolonged isolation, the beard, the weight loss, the pale complexion, he appeared remarkably healthy for someone who had supposedly survived more than a year underground. The chamber where he'd been found was approximately half a mile from where his water bottle had been discovered 14 months earlier. The only access was through the gap the geology team had widened, a passage that had been completely blocked by rockfall. Someone had moved those rocks from the outside after Marcus went in. The chamber itself told a complicated story. Marcus's original day pack was there, along with the empty water bottles and energy bar wrappers consistent with his planned hike. But the chamber also contained equipment he'd never carried. A high-end headlamp with rechargeable batteries, water filtration tablets, emergency blankets, and a cache of vacuum-sealed meal rations. Someone had been supplying him. On a natural shelf in the limestone, investigators found a water-damaged composition notebook. The pages were filled with handwriting in 2 distinct styles. The first, identified as Marcus's based on comparison with his engineering notes, consisted of daily entries beginning on what he marked as Day 1. Made it to the chamber. Passage sealed behind me. Water and food here as promised. This is what I wanted. Time to think, time to be completely alone. No phone, no internet, no obligations, just me and silence. The early entries were methodical, engineer-like. Marcus documented his daily routine, his physical condition, his thoughts about isolation and solitude. He wrote about the relief of being disconnected from the world, the peace of having no decisions to make beyond when to eat and sleep. But around day 60, a second handwriting appeared in the notebook. Looser, less controlled script that belonged to someone else. You're looking better, stronger. I told you this would work. The supplies will keep coming as long as you need them. Don't worry about the outside world. Focus on what you're learning about yourself. The second writer's entries were sporadic but encouraging. They discussed philosophy, literature, the benefits of extended solitude. They referenced books and concepts Marcus had never mentioned in his own entries. The tone was that of a mentor or guide, someone helping Marcus through what they referred to as the process. Marcus's responses, written in the margins or on facing pages, showed gratitude mixed with growing uncertainty. Day 89. I appreciate everything you're doing, but sometimes I wonder if I'm ready for this much isolation. The silence is harder than I expected. Day 134. You were right about the tally marks. Keeping track of time helps, though I'm not sure why it matters how many days it's been if I'm not going anywhere. Day 167. I had the dream again. The one where I'm at my desk in Albuquerque designing a bridge. In the dream, I can't remember why I came here or what I'm supposed to be learning. Is that normal? The unknown writer's final entry was dated day 190. You're asking too many questions. The questions mean you're not ready. When you stop asking questions, when you stop counting days, when you stop wanting to leave, that's when you'll understand what this has been for. After that, Marcus wrote alone for the remaining 237 days of his captivity. His entries became shorter, less detailed. He stopped writing about his physical condition or his thoughts about the outside world. Instead, his notes focused on immediate observations, the sound of dripping water, the texture of limestone, the way shadows moved when he adjusted his headlamp. His final entry was written 3 days before the geology team found him. Day 424. The counting feels important now. Each mark is a day I chose to stay. I could have tried to dig out at any time. I had tools, energy, motivation in the beginning, but I wanted to see how long I could wait, How long before I stopped wanting to leave? I think I know now. The notebook ended there, but the tally marks on the wall continued for 3 more days. When investigators asked Marcus about the unknown writer, he confirmed that someone had been visiting him regularly during his first 6 months underground. Food, water, and supplies were passed through a small gap that had been deliberately maintained in the rockfall. "Did this person threaten you?" asked Detective Roy Sandoval, who took over the case when it became clear that Marcus's disappearance hadn't been accidental. "Were you held against your will?" Marcus considered the question for a long time. "No," he said finally. "I wasn't held. I was facilitated." "What does that mean?" "It means someone helped me do what I wanted to do." "Which was what?" "Disappear." But the evidence suggested something more complex than voluntary isolation. The supplies in the chamber were expensive, military-grade equipment that would have cost thousands of dollars. The water filtration system was sophisticated enough to process groundwater seepage for months. The meal rations were specially designed for long-term storage in humid conditions. Someone had invested significant resources in keeping Marcus alive underground. "This wasn't impulse," Detective Sandoval told his partner after reviewing the evidence. "Someone planned this. They found the chamber, stockpiled supplies, established a delivery system. This took months of preparation." The question was whether Marcus had been a willing participant from the beginning, or if he'd been gradually manipulated into extended captivity. His behavior during interviews was unsettling. Marcus answered every question completely and precisely. He provided detailed information about his daily routine, his physical condition, his relationship with the unknown supplier. But his responses had a rehearsed quality, as if he'd anticipated the questions and prepared careful answers. "He talks like someone who's had a lot of time to think about what he's going to say," observed Dr. Linda Ramirez, a psychologist who evaluated Marcus after his rescue. "His explanations are too neat, too organized. People who've been through trauma usually struggle to articulate their experience. Marcus has no trouble at all." When asked why he'd never tried to escape, Marcus explained that the passage had been blocked and he'd lacked the tools to clear it. But investigators found evidence that the rocks could have been moved from inside the chamber with effort and time. Marcus would have needed weeks of work, but escape had been possible. "Why didn't you try?" Sandoval asked. "But because I didn't want to leave," Marcus said. "Not until I was ready." "When would you have been ready?" Marcus looked at the detective with an expression that might have been pity. "That's what I was trying to figure out." The tally marks became the case's central mystery. 1,400 marks for 427 days, in excess of 973. When asked about the discrepancy, Marcus said he'd been counting something other than days. "What were you counting?" "Moments," Marcus said. "Moments when I could have left but chose to stay." This explanation satisfied no one. Investigators brought in mathematicians, psychologists, and cave rescue specialists to analyze the marks. The consensus was that the marks showed deliberate planning and organization. They weren't random scratches, but methodical documentation of something Marcus considered significant. Dr. Patricia Kemp, a behavioral analyst from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, arrived in Carlsbad 3 weeks after Marcus's rescue. She'd worked cases involving prolonged captivity, Stockholm Syndrome, and what the Bureau classified as consensual entrapment, situations where victims became willing participants in their own imprisonment. "The tally marks aren't random," she told the investigative team after studying photographs of the chamber wall. "They're organized into clusters of 33. 33 marks, then a space, then 33 more. It's his age. He was counting in units of his own lifetime." Marcus had been 33 when he disappeared. If each cluster represented 1 year of his life, the 1,400 marks suggested he was measuring something beyond calendar time, perhaps psychological time, or the weight of accumulated experience. When Kemp interviewed Marcus, she focused on his relationship with the unknown supplier. "Tell me about the first time you met this person," she said. "I didn't meet them," Marcus replied. "Not exactly." "But you communicated." "Through notes, through the notebook. They would leave messages and I would respond." "Did you ever see them?" Marcus hesitated. For the first time since his rescue, he seemed uncertain. Once, he said finally, on day 43. I heard movement in the passage, rocks shifting. I thought maybe the entrance was opening naturally. When I crawled to the gap, I saw someone on the other side. Can you describe them? They were wearing coveralls and a headlamp. The light was too bright to see their face. We looked at each other for maybe 10 seconds. Then they slid a package through the gap. More food, fresh batteries. They didn't speak. How did that make you feel? Grateful, Marcus said immediately, and curious. Curious about what? About whether they'd been lost too. This response intrigued Dr. Kemp. In her experience, kidnapping victims focused on escape, not on their captors' motivations. Marcus seemed more interested in understanding his situation than changing it. Did you think about leaving? She asked. Every day, Marcus said. For the first 100 days, I thought about it constantly. I made plans. I studied the rock fall, figured out which stones were load-bearing, which ones I could move safely. I could have dug myself out in 2 weeks, maybe 3. But you didn't. No. Why? Marcus was quiet for a long time. Outside, Detective Sandoval could hear the air conditioning humming, the distant sound of traffic on the highway. Finally, Marcus spoke. Because I realized I didn't want to go back to the person I was. Doctor. Kemp leaned forward. What kind of person were you? Afraid, Marcus said. I was afraid of everything. Afraid of failing at work, afraid of disappointing people, afraid of making the wrong choice. I'd been living the same day for 10 years. Wake up, go to work, come home, watch television, go to bed. I was 33 years old and I felt like I was already dead. So you saw the cave as an escape. I saw it as a chance to find out who I might be if I wasn't afraid. This explanation troubled the investigators. If Marcus had willingly isolated himself, his disappearance wasn't kidnapping. It was an elaborate form of self-harm. But someone had helped him, provided supplies, enabled his isolation. That person was still unidentified and potentially dangerous. The search for Marcus's supplier began with the notebook. Handwriting analysis confirmed that the second writer was someone with formal education. The vocabulary and syntax suggested college-level literacy, possibly graduate work. The content references included quotations from Henry David Thoreau, Hermann Hesse, and Carl Jung, authors associated with themes of solitude and self-discovery. Detective Sandoval focused on local connections. This wasn't random, he told his team. Someone knew Marcus before he disappeared. Someone who understood his psychological state and saw an opportunity to manipulate him. They analyzed Marcus's life in Albuquerque, his work colleagues, neighbors, social connections. Marcus had been employed by Rodriguez Engineering for 8 years, designing bridges and commercial buildings. His supervisor, Janet Coleman, described him as competent but withdrawn. Marcus was reliable, she said, but he seemed unhappy. He'd come to work, do his job, leave exactly at 5, never socialized, never talked about his personal life. I always got the impression he was waiting for something, just didn't know what. His apartment complex neighbors barely knew him. The building manager, Floyd Hutchins, remembered Marcus as quiet and punctual with rent payments. Nice enough guy, Hutchins said, but he kept to himself. Only time I really talked to him was when he gave me his spare key before that hiking trip. Said he'd be gone for a few days, asked me to water his plants. This detail caught Sandoval's attention. Marcus had given away his spare key before disappearing, suggesting he'd planned to be gone longer than a day hike would require. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Marcus's internet search history. His laptop, recovered from his apartment, showed extensive research into cave systems, survival techniques, and extended isolation. But more interesting were his visits to online forums dedicated to what participants called intentional disappearance. The forums were communities of people who fantasized about vanishing from their ordinary lives. Some discussed it theoretically, others shared detailed plans for starting over in remote locations. A few claimed to have actually done it, abandoned their identities, and begun new lives off the grid. Marcus had been active in these forums for 6 months before his disappearance. His username was BridgeBuilder33. and his posts revealed growing desperation with his conventional life. He wrote about feeling trapped by routine, about wanting to experience authentic solitude, about the courage required to completely disconnect from society. One thread, titled "Has Anyone Actually Done It?", contained dozens of responses from forum members who claimed to have successfully disappeared for weeks or months at a time. Most were obvious fantasies. But one responder, username Cavekeeper, offered specific advice about locations and techniques. "The key is finding someone who understands your commitment," Cavekeeper had written. "Most people who talk about disappearing aren't serious. They want the fantasy, not the reality. But if you're truly ready to give up everything, comfort, safety, connection, there are ways to test that commitment." Cavekeeper and Bridge Builder 33 had exchanged private messages for 2 months before Marcus's trip to Carlsbad. The messages were cryptic, but suggestive of a planned meeting. Bridge Builder 33. "I think I'm ready to find out who I really am." Cavekeeper. "Being ready and being committed are different things. Commitment means accepting that you might not like what you discover." Bridge Builder 33. "I'll take that risk." Cavekeeper. "New Mexico has caves that go deeper than most people imagine, deeper than maps show. If you're serious about testing your commitment, I know a place where you can be truly alone." The messages ended with Cavekeeper providing specific directions to an unmarked trailhead near Carlsbad Caverns. Detective Sandoval obtained a warrant to trace Cavekeeper's online activity. The account had been created using a public library computer in Roswell, New Mexico. The user had paid for premium forum access with a prepaid credit card purchased with cash. No identifying information. But Cavekeeper's posts revealed extensive knowledge of cave systems throughout the Southwest. He or she could discuss the geology, hydrology, and exploration history of caves in Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and Colorado. The level of detail suggested professional expertise. Dr. Sarah Chen, the geologist who'd found Marcus, helped investigators compile a list of people with the necessary cave knowledge. "You're looking for someone with advanced geology training," she said, "probably someone who spent years exploring unmapped caves. And they'd need technical skills, rope work, equipment rigging, long-term provisioning." The list included Park Service employees, professional guides, academic researchers, and serious recreational cavers. Cross-referencing with the geographical area around Carlsbad yielded 18 names. One of them was Dr. Raymond Holloway. Holloway was a retired geology professor from New Mexico State University who'd spent 30 years studying cave formations in the Southwest. He'd published extensively on the Carlsbad system and had been part of several teams that discovered new chambers in the 1990s. He lived alone in a cabin outside Roswell, 40 miles from Carlsbad Caverns. More significantly, Dr. Holloway had lost his own son to suicide 6 years earlier. Thomas Holloway had been 34. Unmarried, working as an accountant in Albuquerque. He'd left no note, no explanation for his decision to drive into the desert and swallow a bottle of sleeping pills. His father had found the body 3 days later. After Thomas died, Ray became obsessed with understanding why, said Dr. Elizabeth Morris, Holloway's former colleague. He'd always been interested in isolation and solitude, that's why he studied caves. But after the suicide, he started talking about how modern life was killing people's souls, how we'd all forgotten what it meant to be truly alone with ourselves. Holloway had taken early retirement shortly after his son's death. He'd sold his house, liquidated his savings, and moved to the cabin. Neighbors described him as friendly but reclusive, someone who might disappear for weeks at a time exploring remote cave systems. When Detective Sandoval and 2 state police officers arrived at Holloway's cabin, they found him loading equipment into a pickup truck, cave gear, ropes, harnesses, headlamps, and several boxes of military-grade meal rations. "Dr. Holloway," Sandoval called out, "we'd like to ask you some questions." Holloway straightened slowly. He was in his late 60s, tall and lean, with the weathered look of someone who spent time outdoors. His expression was calm, but not surprised. "About Marcus Edgewater," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir, about Marcus Edgewater." Holloway nodded. "I've been expecting you." He didn't resist arrest. During the drive to the station, he was polite and conversational, asking about the investigation's progress, expressing interest in Marcus's physical and psychological condition. His attitude was more that of a colleague than a suspect. "How is he adapting?" Holloway asked. "To being back in the world?" "That's not really your concern anymore," Sandoval replied. "Everything about this is my concern," Holloway said quietly. "I created it." In the interview room, Dr. Holloway was forthcoming about his role in Marcus's disappearance. He confirmed that he'd been cavekeeper, that he'd identified Marcus as someone genuinely interested in extended isolation, and that he'd facilitated Marcus's 14-month stay underground. "Marcus contacted me through the forum," Holloway explained. "Most of the people there are fantasists. They want to talk about disappearing, but they don't want to actually do it. Marcus was different. He was serious." "So you decided to help him?" "I decided to test him." "Test him how?" Holloway leaned back in his chair. "By giving him exactly what he said he wanted. Complete isolation. No distractions, no obligations, no connection to the outside world. Just him and silence, for as long as he could stand it. And if he couldn't stand it, then he would have dug himself out." Dr. Holloway described the months of preparation. He'd identified the chamber years earlier during his research, a natural formation accessible through a passage that could be deliberately blocked. He'd stockpiled supplies, established the delivery system, and waited for someone who met his criteria. "What criteria?" Sandoval asked. "Someone who was dying inside," Holloway said. "Someone who understood that modern life was suffocating them but didn't know how to escape it. Someone like your son." Holloway's composure cracked for the first time. He stared at his hands for several seconds before responding. "Thomas couldn't handle the emptiness of ordinary existence. He chose suicide rather than find another way to live. I've spent 6 years wondering if there might have been an alternative." "So you used Marcus as an experiment?" "I offered Marcus an opportunity. The same opportunity I wish I could have offered Thomas." The psychological evaluation of Dr. Holloway revealed a complex motivation. He wasn't a predator in the traditional sense. He hadn't sought to harm Marcus or derive pleasure from his suffering. Instead, he'd become convinced that extended isolation could serve as a therapeutic reset for people trapped in unfulfilling lives. He genuinely believed he was helping Doctor, Kemp explained to the prosecutor. In his mind, Marcus was dying emotionally and spiritually. The cave experience was intended as a kind of rebirth. But the law doesn't recognize amateur therapy conducted through kidnapping and false imprisonment. Holloway was charged with second-degree kidnapping, reckless endangerment, and conspiracy. He pleaded guilty to all charges and was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Marcus attended the sentencing hearing. When asked if he wanted to make a victim impact statement, he declined. After the judge announced Holloway's sentence, Marcus approached the defense table. "Thank you," he said quietly. Holloway nodded. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Marcus considered the question. "I found something," he said. "I'm not sure it was what I was looking for." That conversation was the last time they spoke. Marcus returned to Albuquerque but didn't resume his old job. Rodriguez Engineering had held his position for 3 months, then filled it with someone else. Marcus didn't seem concerned. He'd received substantial compensation from his kidnapping insurance policy, a benefit he'd never known he had, and wasn't in immediate financial need. Instead, he spent his time writing. He'd started a memoir about his underground experience, but the manuscript focused less on the physical challenges of cave survival and more on what he called the archaeology of self-discovery. "The cave didn't change me," he wrote. "It revealed what was already there, all the fear, the dissatisfaction, the sense of being disconnected from my own life. Those things existed before I ever signed the visitor log at Carlsbad. The cave just gave me time to examine them without distraction." Dr. Kemp interviewed Marcus 6 months after his rescue as part of a follow-up psychological evaluation. She found him remarkably well-adjusted considering his ordeal. "Do you have nightmares?" she asked. "No," Marcus said. "I sleep better now than I have in years." "Do you feel angry about what Dr. Holloway did to you?" Marcus thought about this. "I feel sorry for him," he said finally. He lost his son and convinced himself that isolation was the answer to existential despair, but isolation isn't the answer. It's just a way of creating space to find the answer. And did you find it? The answer? I found an answer. Maybe not the answer. Marcus had moved to a small apartment near the University of New Mexico. He'd begun taking classes: philosophy, psychology, literature, the same subjects Dr. Holloway had referenced in his notebook messages. "I realized that my life before the cave wasn't wrong because it was ordinary," Marcus explained. "It was wrong because I wasn't present for it. I was going through motions, waiting for something to happen that would make me feel alive. But nothing external was going to do that. I had to choose to be alive." He'd also begun volunteering with a local crisis counseling center, talking to people who were struggling with depression and suicidal thoughts. His experience with extended isolation, he discovered, gave him insight into the psychology of people who felt trapped by their circumstances. "Most people who call the hotline feel like they're already dead inside," he said. "They're going through the motions of living but not actually living. I understand that feeling. And I understand that there are ways to come back from it that don't involve disappearing into a cave for 14 months. The tally marks remained unexplained. Marcus had given various explanations to different investigators, counting days, counting moments of choice, counting units of time measured in years of his life. Dr. Kemp suspected the marks served multiple functions, evolving in meaning as Marcus's psychological state changed during his isolation. The marks were how he maintained agency, she theorized. He couldn't control his environment, but he could control the record he was keeping. They were proof that he was choosing to stay, even when staying became difficult. Marcus never returned to Carlsbad Caverns. He said the place held no mystique for him anymore. It was just a cave where he'd spent 14 months, learning things he could have learned other ways. But he kept one artifact from his underground experience: the composition notebook. The pages filled with his handwriting and Dr. Holloway's, documenting their strange collaboration in what Holloway had called intentional transformation. "I read it sometimes," Marcus told Dr. Kemp during their final interview. "Not because I miss being underground, but because it reminds me that transformation is possible, that you can be one person at the beginning of a story and a different person at the end. Do you consider yourself a different person now? I consider myself the same person, finally awake." Dr. Holloway died in prison 2 years into his sentence. Heart attack during breakfast, the guard said, quick and unexpected. He'd been working on his own book, a theoretical exploration of isolation as therapy, but never finished it. Marcus learned of Holloway's death from a newspaper article. He felt neither satisfaction nor grief, just a kind of closure. The old man had lost his son and spent his remaining years trying to save other people's sons through methods that made sense to him but to no one else. At Holloway's memorial service, sparsely attended, Marcus was the only speaker who hadn't known him before the cave incident. "Dr. Holloway made a terrible mistake," Marcus said to the small gathering. "He confused his own grief with other people's problems, and he used me to work through psychological issues that were his to resolve. What he did was wrong, and it could have killed me. But he was also correct about one thing. Most of us are living as if we're already dead. We're going through motions, following routines, avoiding the difficult questions about what makes life meaningful. He was wrong to think that extreme isolation was the solution, but he wasn't wrong to believe that transformation is possible." Marcus closed his remarks with a reading from Thoreau, one of the authors Holloway had quoted in his notebook messages. "I went to the woods to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived." Asterisk. "That's what Dr. Holloway thought he was offering me," Marcus said. "The chance to live deliberately. He was wrong about the method, but he wasn't wrong about the need." 3 years after his rescue, Marcus published his memoir. Counting Days. What I Learned About Life by Disappearing From It became a modest bestseller, particularly among people interested in themes of isolation, self-discovery, and psychological transformation. The book's final chapter addressed the question everyone wanted answered. Would he do it again? People ask if I regret my time underground, if I would make the same choice knowing what I know now. The answer is complicated. I don't regret the experience itself. Those 14 months taught me things about myself, about solitude, about the difference between being alone and being lonely, that I couldn't have learned any other way. I emerged from the cave a more conscious version of myself. But I do regret the method. I regret the deception involved, the pain my disappearance caused my sister, the resources wasted on search efforts, the manipulation that Dr. Holloway used to facilitate my isolation. There were other ways to achieve the same psychological transformation, ways that didn't require disappearing from the world or allowing someone else to control my circumstances. The cave taught me that I'd been living unconsciously, going through motions without examining whether those motions served any purpose. But I could have learned that through meditation, therapy, philosophy, travel, or simply by paying closer attention to my daily experience. I didn't need to vanish underground for more than a year. What I did need was to make a conscious choice to engage with my life instead of enduring it. That choice was always available to me. I just hadn't known how to make it. Now I do. Marcus never married, but he formed close friendships with several people he'd met through his volunteer work. He continued taking classes, eventually earning a master's degree in counseling psychology. He specialized in working with people who felt trapped by their circumstances, people who, like his former self, were alive but not living. His sister Diane visited him regularly. She'd never fully forgiven him for the 14 months of grief his disappearance had caused, but she understood that the brother who'd emerged from the cave was fundamentally healthier than the one who'd gone in. "You're more present now," she told him during one of their monthly dinners. "Before, it always felt like you were somewhere else, even when you were sitting right next to me." "I was somewhere else," Marcus agreed. "I was in the future, worried about things that might go wrong. Or in the past, regretting decisions I'd made. I was never actually where I was." "And now?" "Now I'm here," he said. "Right here, right now, eating dinner with my sister. It's not complicated." The chamber where Marcus had spent 14 months was sealed permanently by the Park Service. Too many curiosity seekers had attempted to reach it, creating safety hazards and potential damage to the cave system. A small plaque near the main trail mentions the incident without providing details, in memory of those who have sought answers in darkness and found their way back to light. Marcus visited Carlsbad one final time 5 years after his rescue to see the plaque. He stood in the main cavern for several minutes, listening to tourists exclaim over the formations, watching children run ahead of their parents down the paved trail. It struck him that most of the visitors were experiencing the cave exactly as he had during his original day trip, as a temporary escape from ordinary life, something to see and then leave behind. They were tourists in their own existence, passing through experiences without being fundamentally changed by them. But some of them, he knew, were ready for transformation, ready to stop sleepwalking through their days and make conscious choices about how to live. They didn't need to disappear underground to find that readiness. They just needed to recognize it. Marcus left Carlsbad as quietly as he'd entered it 5 years earlier, but this time, he signed the visitor log on his way out. Marcus Edgewater, Albuquerque, NM. "Thank you." The ranger at the desk didn't recognize the name. To him, Marcus was just another tourist completing his visit, returning to the surface, going home. Which, in every sense that mattered, was exactly what Marcus was doing. The tally marks, carved into limestone 750 feet underground, remain in their sealed chamber. 1,400 scratches in groups of 33, counting something that only Marcus fully understood. They'll endure long after everyone involved in the story has died. A record of one man's attempt to measure the weight of conscious choice, the value of deliberate living, the cost of transformation. And perhaps someday, someone else will find them and wonder what they mean. Perhaps someone else will count the marks and realize that the most important questions aren't about how long we live, but about how deliberately we choose to be alive. The cave keeps its secrets, But some secrets once discovered belong to the world above.